Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Want to reclaim that lost business potential? Look at your culture, says Claudette Rowley, our guest today. Claudette, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Bill. Happy to be here.
Claudette, you say in your book, Cultural Brilliance, that most businesses have not reached their full potential because they're out of alignment with their people. Now, being an employee type of people, is it my responsibility to get in alignment with the business, or is it the other way around?
That's a great question, Bill, and I'm glad we started there. So it is certainly the people who work in a company. Absolutely, they need to be in alignment with the business and the culture. But in terms of the untapped potential that you referenced, one of the things that I see in organizations all the time is people will be, for example, coming forward with ideas, coming forward with things that they see that aren't working so well in the company, and they have ideas and ways to improve them, just as a couple of examples. And the people leading the company are not open to hearing it. Right. So they're not actually, so you have people who say, hey, we have some problems, we have some solutions, leadership, we'd love to resolve these things, and it would make everything better for all of us. And the leadership says, essentially, we're not interested in hearing what you have to say. And so from that perspective, they're out of alignment with the people who are working for them who could actually help improve things.
Now, somewhat shockingly, and I want to make sure I got this number right, this isn't just a few people out of alignment. Something like 88% of the business people you've talked to really say they don't understand culture. Did I get that number correct?
Yeah, that actually comes from a study done by Deloitte a couple of years ago in 2016, and when they surveyed, it was their annual Human Trends Capital Report survey, and what they found is that, 88% of the leaders and CEOs said, we think culture is important, but we don't understand our own cultures. So it is a high number.
And it would almost seem a little embarrassing, too, that if it sounds like something they should know about. Now, for our audience and all of us, how would you define the culture of an organization?
Yeah, and this is, I think, I'm glad you asked that, because when we talk about defining culture and understanding it, it makes sense why it is kind of challenging to understand your own culture. I define cultures as mindsets and behaviors and structures in an organization that sequence and patterns, and those patterns are driving communication, they're driving decision-making, and they're driving results. People also talk about culture as beliefs in an organization that drive behavioral norms. So I can give you a quick example. I was doing some work in a manufacturing company that's been around for about 35 years, and they've been very successful, but they started to have some issues in their production process, operational issues. And so when we started working and taking a look at this, it didn't seem like a cultural issue. It seemed like an operational issue. But long story short, when we dug down and started to look at some of the underlying beliefs in the culture, and these are things that people aren't necessarily aware of or talking about, we found that one of the things that was really hamstringing the operations and production of the company was that people were not comfortable resolving issues and not comfortable communicating with each other in a problem-solving way because they wanted to preserve their relationships. That they felt preserving their relationships with each other was more important than resolving problems. So that was an example of how there were the underlying behavioral beliefs that actually drove behavioral norms that were literally impacting the company's operations.
I'm a big fan of sports radio, and I guess like most people, you listen and your home team has a new manager, a new general manager, and sometimes they're losing for years. And behind that, I'm thinking to myself, I don't think it's the manager or one or two players. I think it's the culture of the organization, because the good teams seem to be good every year in and year out. They do the right things. And the bad teams seem to be bad every year in and year out. So I think this subject is particularly interesting for me as a sports fan, but also if it's that important in sports, imagine any and every business and the ones we're working for and hope to be employed by. I want to know that 88% number is going down, because we're going to be out of business if it's not. Now, I think around page 4 in your book, you talk about some of the, ways of doing things in a business that makes a business culturally brilliant. Can you talk about some of those?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that's paramount is that, and we're hearing this a lot, in the news and in the media about culture, which is that there's a respect and there's trust in the organization, right? And that people feel that they can tell the truth about what they're experiencing. That's huge. Another one is really that instead of treating that everyone who works in an organization is treated like an adult, so they're not, spoken down to simply because they work in a hierarchy or something like that. So there's more of an adult to adult conversation and discussion. Also, that people are really helping each other out by giving constructive feedback, giving positive feedback, right? And saying, hey, we're all in this together, so we might as well help each other out, because you might tell me something I'm actually not aware of in terms of my performance or my communication. Purpose and direction are clear, so people really understand, how am I connected to this larger picture? I might do this one job in the organization, but how does it impact our customers? How does it impact the products we're making on a daily basis, or the service we provide? One of my favorites is actually that conflict gets reframed. And of course, most of us do not enjoy conflict, and certainly at work. But what I find is that when organizations are going through changes, even really, really positive changes, they may have some additional conflicts. They may have some ups and downs, some tensions that erupt. And when conflicts is recast and looked at as something positive in terms of growth, it's much more easily dealt with. And along those lines, looking at problems as opportunities. So as opposed to, oh my gosh, here we have another problem. And I heard that today in a company. I was at a client for a few hours today. And, we have another problem, and everyone's feeling drained and exhausted, as opposed to, and so we talked about it. I said, what if there's an opportunity in this problem? How could this actually benefit your company? And reframing those kinds of problems into an opportunity. Also, that people understand, speaking of the 88%, right? People understand their own culture, and because they understand it, they understand how to work with it in their business and have it really enhance their business. And I think really leadership is huge, and leadership is in the news a lot as well. And we've, lots of leaders lately who are really been revered, like Herb Kelleher, who just passed away and who is the founder of Southwest, and then some leaders who haven't done so well. And I think leaders really leading with integrity and they're having awareness, their own self-awareness is huge. All leaders have blind spots, and I find when they start to ask for feedback about those blind spots, things really start to improve in the culture quite a bit. And then finally, looking at change and competition and any sort of external threats as an opportunity to really adapt in a positive and proactive way. So those are just some of the things that really, when we talk about a brilliant culture, we're looking for some of those different attributes.
Claudette, I think we'd all like to work for a company that exhibits even a few of those traits. I think it would be a lot of fun, a lot more enjoyable. Yeah. And if someone is just tuning in, I'd like to let them know that they're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, and today our guest is Claudette Rowley, Rowley. Her book is Cultural Brilliance. Claudette, is there a website we should know about, and where can we get the book?
Oh, thanks. The website is culturalbrilliance.com, and the book is available on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon and type in Cultural Brilliance, it will come right up. So that's the best place to find it. And
I think it'd be a lot of fun for listeners if there's some problems at work. If you mention to your boss, well, it might be the culture around here, and I just listened to a show with Claudette Rowley, he or she is going to take a second look at you and say, how do you know about that culture stuff? And maybe let's talk about this. So if you want to be a little more in tune with what's going on, if you want that business that sounded so good when Claudette explained it a few minutes ago, get a hold of the book, Cultural Brilliance, by our guest, Claudette Rowley, Rowley. Claudette, you mentioned that brilliant cultures lift people up. How do they do that? I could see it'd be nice to work there, but how do they actually enhance people? Yeah. So when an organization has a brilliant culture or is trending in that direction, and they're lifting people up, it's because people are, so when I'm working in an organization and I'm helping them understand their culture and look at how they want to design a transformation, one of the first things we do is we get people involved. If it's a really small company, we can get everybody involved. If it's too big, we get people involved from every department, every level of the organization. So right from the get-go, we're getting this full participation or full representation. So in companies in which people haven't had much of a voice,
didn't feel comfortable or safe to talk about their own experiences or share ideas, they're now being asked to do that. And so, that is, for many people, lifts them up. When the culture evolves into an entity in which people are expected to share ideas, and we want people to talk and we want people to brainstorm and innovate and things like that, that starts to lift them up because they get empowered. And that's what I see. I'll walk in a company and it's what I call the light comes back on in people's eyes. So people that were disengaged are actually pretty excited to be at work now because they get to bring the best part of themselves and really, really contribute. And the other thing that happens in these cultures is that those organizations know their purpose and direction, and people and everything that's done in the company is centered around it. So if I'm working in this culture, I know that even if I'm doing a job that maybe is repetitive or isn't my favorite job, I know that how it contributes to the company and our customers, and I know that I have a purpose in doing that, and that lifts me up also.
And if I took good notes when I was going through your book, I think there was a section that said actual studies show that performance of a company was a function of culture, and if I use my math background correctly, that means that a good culture is going to lead to better performance, and stockholders and people who are interested in those bottom line numbers are going to be happier. Is that the key?
Yeah, absolutely. That if you have people, like you said, when you're doing the math, right? If you have people who their performance is enhanced and they're solving problems and they're making better decisions and their emotional intelligence is increased so they can communicate as they need to, it absolutely hits your bottom line in a really positive way. And you'll see, I'm working in the company right now as a consultant where they just had their best year. 2018 was their best year ever. And it's not only because of the cultural work we did, but that was part of it because people's performance definitely increased.
So basically, we get a company where the people are happy, they enjoy coming to work, the boss has less problems, and the bottom line is better. What's not to like?
What's not to like? Yeah, and part of that too, is also that people are held accountable. So it's not. So there's that piece too, right? They're held accountable for the higher performance standards. But yeah, what's not to like?
But when I hear that, I was trying to analogize it in my own life. If there's something I'm working on that I really enjoy, and that's usually one of those things where we either volunteer, a not-for-profit in town, a soccer club, Little League, or a project or something. When you're doing that, I think you don't really mind being held accountable if you're enjoying what you're doing, you have a real purpose behind it. And if someone just says, you did this incorrectly, or so long as it's done in a professional way, not to embarrass the person, I don't think most of us mind it because we realize that that's making us better doctors, better accountants, better engineers, whatever we're doing. If someone just keeps us online and we achieve more and usually feel better about that, am I thinking the wrong way?
Oh, I think you're thinking the right way.
Okay, well, that's because I read your book, so
right.
I'm getting good information out of there. No, I'm sorry. Let me let you finish.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the compliment. I was going to say that it is true that when people are enjoying what they're doing and they're growing also, right? They like it, but they're hopefully also growing themselves in their skills or in their confidence or however they're developing. And someone comes along, as you were saying, and offers them a tip or says, I don't know if you're aware, right? If you do it this way, it's going to be easier. Or we actually see so much potential in you. We'd like to challenge you, right? To get better in these three areas. Absolutely. I find that most people really are energized by that. And once in a while, I've seen that someone will self-select out, that they may decide, I actually don't want to grow or I don't want to excel in a certain way, and so they may leave the organization. But it's their choice at that point to do that.
And how many times do we see football players or baseball players say, that coach, that person challenged me, they pushed me to my highest potential, and I wouldn't be in the major leagues or the pro ranks today if not for them. So I think deep down we really want that. Claudette, at this point in the show, we like to remind our listeners that you're listening to The Secrets of Success. My name is Bill Horan. The show is produced at the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. We'll be right back after the break.
You're neutral to it. You hear it every time you finish a meal and never feel anything. But if we were able to associate this sound with a new stimulus, save the food, we've achieved pulling a natural response from you. Save the food. Why are we doing this, you may ask? Save the food. Because this ad is trying to change your after-meal behavior through brainwashing. Because food waste costs the average family $1,500 a year. Save the food, cha-ching. And $1,500 extra bucks is like getting a pay raise. Save the food, cha-ching. You're promoted. Which could pay for your child's braces. Save the food, cha-ching. You're promoted.
Check out my braces.
So when you hear this sound, rethink your behavior. Cook it, store it, share it. Just don't waste it. For tips and recipes, visit savethefood.com. Brought to you by NRDC and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Secrets of Success. I'm your host, Bill Horan, and today we're speaking with Claudette Rowley, author of Cultural Brilliance. Claudette, I think it's around page 10 in your book. You mentioned 5 signs that something must be fixed. I guess these are always the red lights that tell us if they're flashing, something's going wrong. But can you give us those alert signs? And maybe some of us will say, gee, I'm seeing 2 or 3 of those in the business I work for.
Thanks, Billy. I'd be happy to do that. So one of the signs is that people are punished for telling the truth. So they go to their manager or a leader in the organization and say, something I'd really like to share about, what I'm seeing in our company. It could be a product defect. It could be a behavioral issue, whatever the case may be. And they tell the truth about it, and maybe they don't get that promotion they've been hoping for. Maybe someone talks behind their back. But there's a way in which they get punished for sharing that truth. And then, we know how it is, right? When that happens, then nobody else is going to tell the truth.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. I mean, we
keep your mouth shut and you keep your job.
Right, exactly. And that people become conditioned to do that in those cultures. The leaders asking for more data and doing nothing about the problem. And I see that quite a bit. And, leadership team will say, okay, give us more data on this particular issue. And so, the team of 4 or 5 people go and get it. They present the data. And then the leaders don't do anything with it. And they don't respond, they don't take action, they don't talk about it again. And after a while, people stop wanting to share data because they've now figured out, of course, that this leadership team just asked for data, so they can say they quote unquote had taken action, but they're really not. So it really frustrates and disengages people when that pattern starts up. Your culture makes people leave. I mean, that's really straightforward. If a lot of people are leaving your organization, it's time to take a look at your culture, right? Because people, as we know, change jobs, but you shouldn't see a revolving door of people in or out of your company. That's definitely a big warning sign. Your culture is tolerating bullying behavior, right? So we know, and I'm talking about truly bullying behavior, right? And so what we see sometimes is organizations will say, he or she is a rainmaker. They have the biggest account. They bring in so much money, and because of that, we can't possibly live without them, even though they treat other people horribly and they're a bully. And there's actually people who study this and have done the dollars and cents and math on this find that bullies actually cost companies a tremendous amount of money because of certainly people who leave the company because of the bully. People who are emotionally impacted if they're being bullied, right? Their performance goes down. And so there's a host of different aspects of bullying that impact a company. And so if your company is tolerating bullying behavior, first of all, you can replace almost anybody, if not anybody. And secondly, it means you're valuing somebody's contribution to an organization through dollars and cents much more than you are treating people with respect, treating them with dignity, and making sure they're treated reasonably well in a humane way. So that is really a no-no to tolerate any bullying behavior. And finally, people working in open space, and that doesn't sound like a cultural red flag, but let me explain. And that's usually
that's the one I had a question mark near in my book because I said, "What's wrong with that?"
Yeah. So exactly. So in some cases, there's nothing wrong with it. But what I've seen in some organizations is, and I literally have worked in 2 or 3 of them as a consultant, where they've created this open space, and they've said, now everyone will be more collaborative. Except people are not more collaborative because they're all working with earbuds in or headphones on because it's too noisy for them, or you could drop a pin in there, it's so silent because nobody wants to disturb anybody else. So they're still not collaborating more. And what I find there is that kind of open space is not always, but often put in place without really checking in with people in the workforce and saying, what are your needs? What are your work style needs? Given the kind of work that you do, what kind of office space would help you perform at your best, at your peak? So really designing workspace to fit the job functions and roles, and then giving people some options, I think, is actually the way to go.
Claudette, I think that's a great list, because many times a young person, if they're at one of their first or early in their career jobs, they see these things and just assume, well, that's the way it must be everywhere, because that's what goes on here. People are punished for telling the truth, or it's not accepted, or they're kind of just shunted aside. You mentioned that leaders ask for more and more data, but they do nothing about it, so you're putting reports together or summaries and nothing's happening. The culture, people are leaving either weekly or monthly, and you're still there. People work in open spaces, or the culture tolerates bullying behavior. And I think for young people, if they see this, or people at a job, right away this is telling you something. You're probably not going to be there too long, or if you are, you're going to be kind of miserable unless you really like this kind of existence, and few people do. So I think that's a good red flag and alert for people to be aware of and to watch out for. Claudette, we also want to let our audience know that if they're just tuning in, our guest today is Claudette Rowley, Rowley. The book is Cultural Brilliance. And you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. While we're talking about this, Claudette, I'd like to let listeners know that if you didn't hear the entire show, you can go to our podcast at nccradio.org. Just look for The Secrets of Success under podcasts, and you can hear everything that Claudette said before, go over the lists, maybe go out and get a copy of the book, and make that company a lot better, or at least give your boss some tips, or at least avoid these kind of things in the next company you go to. And Claudette, could you tell me your website and where we can get the book?
Absolutely. The website is culturalbrilliance.com. And the book, best place to get the book is right on Amazon. Nice and easy, both in Kindle and in print.
Now, Claudette, when you go into a company, do you say to them, your culture is a little off, or how do you approach this with them? Because I'd imagine that's a tough sell.
Yeah. So usually people are coming to me because they want to take a look at their culture. So they're at least open to the idea that that the culture may be causing some of the issues in their organization, and so it's a little bit easier. And then they decide whether they and I would be a good fit in terms of meeting their goals. The goals they're trying to achieve through this change. But you're right. If I'm asked to come into an organization for an initial meeting to solve a different kind, like a communication problem, let's say, and we just don't communicate well, or we have a lot of unresolved conflict, and the companies in advance decided that that's actually the problem they're having, a lot of times what I find is it's a symptom of a cultural issue, and they may or may not buy that. You're right. They may, once I go through it and I do some assessment work and initial analysis, and we discuss, what we've uncovered together, they may say, wow, I really see it now. But I've also had some cases where, a leadership team said, we know this is a communication issue. We have a great culture. And those two issues, if you have a great culture, you usually have pretty good communication. But there are leadership teams I've spoken to that actually wanted those two things to coexist. We do not have a cultural issue. We're just fine. Can you just fix our communication? So, yeah.
I was going to say, there's probably something they say, oh, no, we just need more sales, or the accounting department is a little slow, or our advertising group has to be changed. Because this sounds like you really it's like telling someone, no, you have to lose weight and you have to do it now. And we don't want to hear that. We just want a suit that makes us look thinner, or a new haircut or something like that. So I would think it's a difficult sell. When the companies agree to it, what is the first step that you do to work with them?
So the first thing we do is it's actually called the authenticity phase of the process I use, but it's essentially finding out how the culture operates. So one of the things I say to organizations is you can't change what you don't understand. So we go beneath the surface of what we can, there are aspects of culture, of course, we can see, right? What a company's, the decor is, right? The physical appearance, the environment, what it feels like to be there, anything we can observe, but then there's a whole lot of culture that's not really observable. So we do some assessment work and interview work, and I work with lots of different aspects of the organization to really start uncovering how the culture operates. What behaviors are getting rewarded? What behaviors are tolerated? What are the belief systems running the organization? Things like that.
Now, how long does it really take when you're doing it with let's say a medium-sized company? How long does it take to really see results?
So we see results in phases, right? So you'll start to see. So the process I use has 3 main phases. And so by the time we're in the middle phase of it, which is where we're doing the cultural redesign, we're already starting to see some small changes, right? Because people are energized and excited, and they may be open to doing some things differently at that point. But to really see a full evolution of the culture in a medium-sized company, you'd start seeing it anywhere between, maybe a year and a half. And that, of course, the caveat is it depends with what state the culture was in to begin with. But yeah, around a year and a half. But all the way through the process, what I have seen is that you see, especially there are always going to be early adopters in the organization, just like with any change. So you'll start seeing certain departments or teams make some shifts culturally, and then there'll be kind of the middle phase of people, and then the people that are coming at the end who maybe had a harder time with the changes.
You say some companies start out brilliant and then kind of lose it over the time. Is there any relation to the age of the people, meaning a boss who maybe founded the company 60 years ago, or the son taking over, or nephew or something? Does that make any difference?
I haven't seen that make a difference. And I know why you're asking that question. It's actually a really interesting question. But I have not seen age play a role. I mean, I can think of some people I've worked with who were in their 20s or 30s who were really against any sort of change in the organization. And I've worked with people who were in their 50s or 60s who really, once the dots connected for them about why it was important and how it was going to benefit the company and them, they were really on board. So I've seen the whole gamut.
Claudette, if somebody is, we hope they're listening to the show intensely today. If someone is hearing this, what would be a good step if they say, she's describing my company? What's a good step or a good first step for that person to do tomorrow?
Yeah, one thing they can do is start, I call it being a cultural detective, but it's really start listening and noticing and observing and keeping track of, are there certain patterns of behavior they notice in the organization? Are there things that they can kind of, if they wanted to understand the culture better and they wanted to maybe bring those patterns of behavior to, if it's not the leader you're talking about, but they wanted to bring it up to a leadership level, or if they are a leader, share it with their peers, really start becoming an observer and detective in their culture and listen and notice and start to take some notes about what do they really see? For example, are almost, do the same 3 people talk in every meeting? Do problems always get solved pretty much the same way, which might be well or not well, right? So things like that. What can they observe?
Claudette, I'm going to have to. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you short. Our time is just running out. But before we do, I want our audience to know the book is Cultural Brilliance by our guest, Claudette Rowley, Rowley. And once again, that website?
CulturalBrilliance.com.
Claudette, thanks so much for being with us today. We'd like to remind our audience that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week when we'll continue our journey to success.